Hello everyone, it's Simply Sweet here. In today's video, we'll be discussing Dungeon Pulls Etiquette. What is Dungeon Pull Etiquette? Dungeon Pull Etiquette is when you have big pulls versus small pulls, and what type of mitigation you should be using as a tank, and why is it important for you to know the different systems that are within a dungeon. What is a big or a small pull? A big pull is when a tank will pull all of the dungeon mobs to the next boss room, like right before it, or they will stop when there's actual wall physically stopping you from going any further. Small pulls are where you pull around 3 to 5 different types of mob packs, and that's how you'll get through the dungeon. Big pulls are the time saver. Small pulls are actually technically a waste of time, as you're making people do a dungeon longer than is actually necessary. Big pulls are a big trust between the tanks and the healers. If a tank or a healer are not comfortable with a dungeon, or they are still leveling the class and don't understand some of their mitigation tools, they need to speak up, as it is their job to make sure to communicate with their co-partner that they've been paired with, that their co-partner knows that, hey, I'm not very comfortable with you doing big pulls because I cannot physically handle it. And that's okay. You are allowed to ask for smaller pools if necessary. Now, if you're one of those people that are going to be, oh, you don't pay my sub, and when somebody says, well, I'm going to do small pools and you're going to have to deal with it, here's a counter argument to that. You don't pay for the other 3 people's sub. Everyone's time needs to be valued in the dungeon. If your time isn't being valued in the dungeon, or you don't like how the run is going, you are allowed to leave the dungeon, but you're not allowed to waste 3 people's time because you're not willing to communicate, I can only do small pools because I'm still learning my class. Now that you understand a little bit about the big pools and the small pools, let's go into some specific type of dungeons that are actually required to have some knowledge in. Stone Vigil, Iron Vale, Stone Mall, The Burn, and Domo Castle are the dungeons that you will not expect wall-to-wall pulls on, but you can do them in. I'm going to use Iron Vale as an example, as it is one of the best dungeons to use for an example. Now, why does this dungeon matter? This dungeon, by design, has poison that can cause the healer to either Suna or just flat out heal. But due to the poison, you're constantly taking more damage. And in Iron Vale, you have this ginormous room filled with a boatload of mobs, plus poison, that the healer would have to heal through. Now, that's actually very difficult for a healer on its own. A tank with minimal cooldowns, as this dungeon does not have level 80 cooldowns, it has level 50 cooldowns. It becomes a bit more difficult when you think about it on how a healer or a tank can handle it, especially if they are new. That dungeon specifically do smaller pools. For a little bit higher end level dungeons, such as the Burn or Domo Castle, they have a ton of mobs that are going to kill you, and it can be extremely overwhelming for new players, as they may not be ready to take on 20 plus mob pulls, and it can actually lead to a lot of wipes. Now you understand a bit more about the dungeon's design and how some dungeons you can do big pulls, and some dungeons you need to do a little bit more smaller pull. Let's go into how would a tank, a healer, and a DPS should handle different types of pulls. When you start a dungeon as a tank, make sure to check your chat to see if anybody says first time or that you're going to receive a bonus for completing the dungeon. Make sure you know if your healer is the one that's new or a DPS. This will give you a big idea if it's okay to do big pulls or not. But if you're still very unsure or you don't know if the healer is up to par, you can do a test big pull. And if you do wipe and then you try to communicate and the healer just says, oh, I just can't handle it, you can do smaller pulls. But if the healer says, oh, I messed up a cooldown, I'm so sorry, try again. It's okay to do trials and errors on the big pulls, as they are still more effective than you going through and killing every single mob singularly. For healers, you want to check the chat box as well, just to make sure that, oh, is my tank new? Okay, this might be a little slower, and that's okay. The reason why is that it's actually extremely toxic for a healer to sit there and press rescue to forcefully make a tank pull more than they are actually feeling comfortable with. Another also good thing is make sure you check your tank's gear. You can also say this for everybody in the party to check each other's gear, as you might not know if somebody's actually bare minimal eye level in the dungeon, and that can cause problems. If a tank is below the eye level requirements for a dungeon, or just barely scraping into it, you might not be able to do big pulls because you're just not going to have the health to withstand some of these mobs, and that's okay. For a DPS, make sure you know your AoE rotation. If you spent 20 to 45 minutes in this dungeon, it would be extremely awful for you to wait another 20 to 45 minutes to get into another dungeon because you can't keep up the damage. As some groups do kick people because of quote unquote lack of damage, even though technically there's more going on than just lack of damage. If you're in a low level dungeon and you don't have your AoE, just try and spread your dots or just focus a mob that's getting lower health the fastest, and that'll just work out better. As at level 15, you don't have an AoE ability, but as you level up around the 50 range is when you actually need to start realizing that you have to AoE. Thank you for watching this video. Please leave a comment about your opinion on big pulls. Don't forget to like and subscribe while you are thinking about your comment.